Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of TIDES. I'm your host, Shveta Malhan, managing partner and co founder of Yenza 3, where we guide HR and business leaders through AI transformation so that they can adapt, adopt, and thrive. Today, we are diving into a topic that's more important than ever: stakeholder involvement in AI transformation, and specifically, why it's crucial for HR and IT teams to forge a tight partnership. With the rise of digital transformation, we have seen so many projects fail because they forgot to bring the right voices in early, or they assumed technology is an IT thing and forgot the human element. So, to help us untangle all of this, I'm thrilled to have Patti Blackstaffe on the show. Patti is an executive leadership advisor for digital transformation and technology leaders, and she's worked on large scale organizational change initiatives, bridging the gap between business strategy, technology, and of course, people. So I can't wait to hear her insights on getting HR and IT to collaborate effectively, especially around AI. Patti, I'm so excited you could join us today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate you inviting me.
All right, let's warm things up. I just wanted to kind of hear a little bit of your backstory. How did you get started with helping organizations tackle these big transformation projects where cross functional teams and leadership all have to sync up? Was there any particular turning point in your career that led you to focus on bridging these silos?
Absolutely. I started in IT outsourcing. So I was a systems technologist to begin with. And then I moved on to working internationally in sales, marketing, and installation of control systems. So the company I was working with had a presence in about 40 different countries. And these control systems were quite impactful to the organization as well as to the consumer that they, worked with. So I've been in tech for over about 20 years. I'm aging myself there, and noticed a gap in both the leadership and the transformation efforts in terms of being able to prepare people and make sure all stakeholders were involved. So I took a huge leap. It was 2008 when I decided to start a company that was focused on leadership, organizational change management, and digital transformation. Since then, I've worked on, ERP, CRM, service management, technology stabilization projects. I've worked in a number of different areas in terms of industry, healthcare, education, oil and gas, what have you. And eventually started incorporating governance because that was another missing gap. And every time I saw a missing gap, I kept thinking, man, these projects could use this or they could use that. And I began advising leaders in ways to help make their transformation successful.
Wow, what a rich experience. I'm so excited to kind of pull from your lived experiences to see what can be applied in today's context. Because if we look at AI, the speed, the scope, the size of this change that we are experiencing is so unprecedented. So if we pivot to AI, and when it comes to AI projects, I feel like it's easy for leaders to think that, oh, that's just a tech thing. Let's let IT handle it. But we know that leaves out so many critical perspectives. So, from your experience, why do you believe involving a broad group of stakeholders, especially HR or leaders who are responsible for people, is essential from the get go?
Well, first things first, the organization itself has changed. The business has changed. We no longer have tech as a support for the work we do. Tech is the work we do. Tech enables everything we do in a business. And there's a significant cost to ignoring that human-centric design around the use of that tech within an organization and how it applies to both employees and stakeholders as well as customers. Everything in the organization is connected. Like it's this tight system now that is so interconnected with the technologies. We don't just have desktops and servers anymore. We've evolved into this huge, expansive, interconnected set of systems that help us do our work. When we only focus on a narrow set of stakeholders, we open the door to disjointed efforts, inefficiency, and fragmentation, right? So we're just welcoming it when we fail to look at that. The key to early and transparent involvement, though, is for primary, secondary, and tertiary stakeholders to develop the organizational readiness required for that transformative change, and especially with AI, because we're talking about segmented data that needs to be collected. We need to look at privacy. We need to understand intellectual property, how that segments and doesn't segment in order to allow AI to do the work it is clean data sets for AI to be able to function properly without bias and securely, in so much as we're not sharing the wrong information with the wrong people or the right information with the wrong people. Tech
Yeah.
permeates every part of the business. So
Mhm.
every single stakeholder, especially as AI is ramped up, both internally and utilized externally within an organization, has to have a voice for how all of those changes will impact them specifically, and what that does to the interconnected and interdependent and dependent areas of the organization.
Well, you make a really good point about the data angle to getting visibility into what areas of your or pockets of your organization are ready and who's doing what, where, and leveraging AI how. I'm just curious to know when it comes to people data, based on your lived experiences, do you think many organizations are ready with that? Like, I know that organizations focus more on customer centric data. They know every aspect of the people data from a customer lens. But what's your take on the employee lens when it comes to data?
I would say it's really poor. Unfortunately, even at the board level, what we're not tracking is we're not tracking turnover and retention. We're not looking at which managers are capable of retaining staff. We're not looking at year over year loyalty of employees. We're not looking at employee satisfaction to the degree where we can actually say our leaders are aligned with being able to ensure that the users in our organizations or the employees who work for them actually are led in such a way that it's agile and flexible, because we are in that space now. We don't have the luxury of leaning into old world leadership dynamics, right? You look at organizational change management and digital transformation and how that works. For instance, one CRM rollout that I worked on wanted to ensure a unified and consistent awareness and understanding of their organization, as well as delivery of the product from the get-go through to the consumer back to loyalty. And their executive committee just assumed this is, let's pop in the technology. But they failed to understanding the data limitations that existed. Every single department was segmented. They had their own data storage. They didn't have a solution that was actually working in terms of data management, data collection. They failed in understanding what is the most important data to meet our goals. All of those little pieces really come from those stakeholders. And unless we understand and unify that stakeholder engagement among all of the different functions that pertain to the implementation of this, we are seeing ourselves wind up just like this organization did: stop the project, implement something that they were missing. Start the project, stop the project, implement the next thing. So, data management needed to be handled. Then they needed to be able to figure out how they were housing that data. Then they needed to figure out, is the data clean enough for us to actually be able to achieve what we're trying to achieve? And the different processes and little scripts, walking into finance and finding out that someone locally had created a bunch of scripts that actually automated their work outside of the unified system. Had we just implemented, everything would have been broken.
Yeah.
Everything in finance would have been broken. You couldn't have invoiced your clients. You couldn't have, right? So early on, when you're implementing, getting all of the stakeholders, your primary, secondary, and tertiary stakeholders together to understand what they do, how they do it, what they use, all of those pieces will then lead into eliminating delays, eliminating risk, reducing the problems that we see with digital transformation on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we look at AI projects and how organizations are striving to integrate AI into their DNA, is HR at the seat on the decision making table?
I would like to say that in my experience, I don't have data on this, but in my experience, HR and IT are often at odds. They both believe their responsibilities are their own and the technology lives in IT and that people live in HR and that never the twain shall meet. It's absolutely vital that HR and IT become partners. They need to really understand that their priorities have to be unified with a solid goal. processes and procedures can't be ignored. They need, to ensure they're not creating disconnects between the two. HR and IT, along with finance and marketing, are probably the four that really need to work together to ensure that every move they make during a transformation follows the same set of goals and that they understand each other very, very well.
And I'm just kind of curious to expand on this angle because I feel like in the limited lived experiences that I have for digital transformation efforts, typically, like let's say, for example, a company is trying to implement Salesforce.com in their ecosystem, they will spin up a separate change team. Like even in ERP days, IT would have a separate change team sitting in IT. Rarely would we go to speak to HR unless like there's a seismic reorg involved or something like that. But here with AI in the mix, I think it's not like implementing a typical technology tool. So it makes the conversation between, like you said, the C-suite executives, including the chief people officer, to come together to understand and diagnose together. Where do we start? Like, what's the human impact on it? Because it's not a typical digital transformation. Would you agree?
I would agree wholeheartedly. We've seen a trend over the years of sliding organizational change, and I'm going to call that OCM from now on. OCM under a project manager's purview, whereas you've just taken the word organization right out of it, and you're sliding it in under a project manager, as opposed to really recognizing the critical importance of organizational change management as a competency that is for the whole organization. So a center of excellence is what I would recommend to an organization. Set up a center of excellence. If they need to bring in extra resourcing to work with that center of excellence, that's great. But I would never, ever put it under a project manager. I would literally have that organizational change management competency working with the executive, reporting directly to the executive and the steering committee, having a seat on the steering committee. And that's critical. I believe that HR and IT inform the organizational change competency. I don't necessarily believe that OCM needs to live in HR either. Right? I feel that if it's given a seat at the table for what we are about to embark on over the next 5 to 10 years, then at the steering committee level, reporting directly to the executive, then you will be looking at the organization as a system. Because we have to see it as a system. That is exactly how it functions when you are implementing, especially when we're talking about AI.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think HR in this mix like if this capability sits right outside of IT and outside of HR, but HR still, I think, needs to get their house in order. Like we talked about data.
Very much so.
Who is going to give the right information and people data to this OCM sitting independently, getting a holistic perspective? I don't think HR teams are fully ready. I don't think even all HR teams right now have the capability to understand the complexity of OCM to even strike that partnership, or the complexity of impacts of technology to strike that
Right.
partnership.
We've made it over the years as a side of the desk kind of activity and delegated it down. I think it's really critical that the organizational change management and HR and IT are all unified with finance and marketing. Those are the key. Those are the ones that when you get all of that together into a room and you start looking at what does the data look like, you are now unifying it as a system, right? But I would argue that we have a lot of data in our organizations and most of it's mismanaged and a lot of it's garbage. So every organization that is embarking on a digital transformation is embarking on that in order to have this achieved, scalability. They're looking at building and growing. So if you have bad data, you're just going to scale bad data. If you have poor interconnections and interdependencies and processes and procedures, you're going to scale that. If you have crappy governance, you're going to scale that. The whole deal is to really, if you're going to do this, you have to start small and you have to look big. Start early. We need to really, truly understand the impact to the organization at a very micro level before we embark on running straight forward, which is counter to what most organizations feel they need in order to be competitive in the market today. There's a real challenge there. It's incredibly difficult to convince an executive that you have to wait, let's slow down and put on the brakes because we have to do this first. However, if you had that organizational change body, if you had a group that was already understanding the organization and understanding it well and working tightly with HR and IT, here's what you would achieve. You would be able to lessen that time of impact. But if you keep bringing people outside, throwing them under a project manager in IT, you don't already have the basis from which you can manage change quickly.
Yeah, very, very amazing points. So, if we hypothetically take an organization that is struggling with, let's say, relevance threat, every organization today might feel that pressure in some capacity with AI in the mix, and they don't have this standalone OCM capability right now. Who would be the right person or team of people going to the right decision makers to spin up this capability, and how do they go about convincing the leadership to invest in this?
Your leadership has to first understand the foundations of agility and flexibility. There has to be an environment of innovation. If there isn't an environment of innovation, nothing's going to move fast. It will start fast, stop, and then you'll have delays. If you are looking at a center of excellence for organizational change for your organization, you need someone in the executive suite who is responsible for that group. So that's where you start. That mandate then gets defined by an executive player who has the power and authority to ensure that it is working. It is their job then to pull in HR and IT together to ensure that that competency or that center of excellence has the voice of the organization. So there are some, I say this all the time, you need the essentials. You have to lay the foundation in the environment before you can actually make something of this work. But every time we delegate from the executive, when we say, oh, HR, could you just do that over there? It's just like when they tried to put, agile teams in. It was like, you guys do that down there in the corner, but we're not going to change anything with the organization to set you up for success. If you are looking at setting up the competency, you have to have the environment that will support it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think right now is the time, even for organizations who think, like if we look at the maturity curve or awareness or readiness curve of organizations when it comes to AI, there are some who are like knee deep and experimenting and trying, while others are like still hesitant and, not fully bought into it and still in wait and watch mode. I would say, irrespective of where you're at in your journey with AI integration into, or redefining, let's put it as redefining your organization with AI, so that it doesn't sound like we are implementing a tool in an organization.
Right.
Where I lost my chain of thought. Where was
Yeah,
I?
well, like you're looking at team and culture, right? You have to really define the organization in a way that addresses some concerns. So there's definitely bias concerns. There's definitely privacy concerns. We have to look at workforce disruption, loss of jobs, upskilling, transparency and accountability, security, misinformation, and all of those things. When you can really have a stakeholder vantage point, and this is where we talk about one of the mandates of an organizational change competency or a center of excellence would be communities of practice. And that is where you can really unify your stakeholders in a way that is ongoing for continual improvement, as opposed to striking up a group off the side of their desk every time you want to do something new. We're looking at an age where we have to move so rapidly to keep up with technology, which is different. Technology years ago was keeping up with us. Now we're having to keep up with technology. And if we're going to do that, we have to understand that there are communities of practice. There are places that throughout the organization that can be ongoing, working on something all the time, so that we're not doing these one-offs, right? We need to increase budgetary funding for the implementation of AI, yes, but we're failing to add additional funding for upskilling, setting the organization up for success, for organizational change management. So if we started small and we worked our way up, most organizations kind of have versions of their AI. So whether it's Gen AI, the use of Gen AI, which is what's rapidly going right now, or the AI that we're all used to, which is the assessment of resumes and, the odd bot on as customer service bot or what have you, and a little bit of predictive analysis. And that's really where we've been for the last few years. And then this Gen AI came out, and our ability to really take those large learning language models and move them into different ways to really evaluate and engage with technology. If we're going to keep up with that, we have to set the environment up for success, right?
Yeah, so true. And you make a really good point about Gen AI, which is just one type of AI that has to be integrated into the organization. Like I hear a lot of companies talking about we're rolling out Microsoft Copilot or Chat GPT.
Mm-hmm.
That's just one flavor of AI. There are so many other nuanced implementations of AI, and I look at it from three perspectives. Yes, automation is going to continue. We've been on the automation journey for a while. With AI, now it's going to be even better and faster. Then there are parts of our work that can be augmented with tools like Gen AI. I do X. Now I have Gen AI. I can do X with magnified intelligence. But now with AI agents in the mix, there are parts of my job, my workflow that can be totally taken over by agents where, like the human doesn't have to be involved the way we've typically been involved in the past. So in this scenario, if we go like a few steps deep around making decisions around where do we implement AI and in what flavor, who is making those decisions and choices? Like, is it IT? Do they have the capability? Is it HR? They certainly don't have that capability. So how do we get to address that to make it
So you've
much more pointed?
mentioned so many different pieces. So let me try and break some of it down a little bit with my limited knowledge of hands-on, AI development and modeling. I would believe that when we're looking at the organization, the stakeholders are really critical to understanding how those things get implemented. But we're not just talking about Gen AI. We're not just talking about assistants and Chat GPT and having new creative capabilities. We're talking about predictive analysis. We're talking about trying to stop breast cancer years before we used to be able to see it. We're talking about understanding personalization and caring about the individual as a customer. We're talking, so there's so many different types of AI that we can engage with within our organization. A lot of it is really responsive to the goals that we're trying to achieve and the effect and impact we're trying to have in the marketplace. I think people are scared because that piece you mentioned about some of the work I no longer have to do, they're scared that they're all going to lose their jobs. And we keep hearing, oh, no, you're not going to lose your job because, this will free you up to higher value work. But the organization hasn't set them up for that higher value work.
Yeah.
So the organizations of from the 80s until most recently have all been about, if we need these people, we have these people, we let the other people go. And they have failed their employees and they have failed their organization by failing to upskill and bring people back. So while, yes, we're eliminating routine tasks and analysis, we have to make room for higher value work. What does that look like from a strategic level? What does that look like when we're talking about skills, when we're talking about AI skills? So you also mentioned modeling. When we talk about what is the AI doing and how is it doing, right? If we're going to create an environment for AI success, we have to have partnerships between departments. And I've mentioned these before, HR, finance, marketing, and IT. We need to have incredible data management. Then we need to have planning, assessments, and management of skills and upskilling. What are we going to need in the future? Who do we have? What are their talents? What could we do to support those talents to help that grow? Could we take this person who's losing this job and move them into, you have some great, wonderful BAs out there, business analysts, who really could turn into AI analytic people if you sent them to that education. If you want to work with people, you have to start asking the employees, and I really wish HR was better at this. You have to start asking employees, what part do they want to play in this new world?
Mm-hmm.
We're redefining our company. If it's true transformation, not just dumping a tool into the mix,
Yeah.
If we're really transforming, what role do you want to play? There's a great tool out there. It's called SFIA, SFIA. It is a skills assessment that I would have every single HR department have under their belt because it works with the employee to help them really define the skills they need, the skills they have. You can look at your organization completely differently and say, oh, you know what? We have all these people over here. We don't have to let them go. We can shift this because they already have those skills. But if we don't have the information, if we don't have the data, then we're failing both the employees and the company, right? And I think HR has a much bigger role to play there.
Yep, yep. And gone are the days of doing competency mapping, which takes like years to put together. And by the time it's done, everything is changed again. So SFIAs, I agree with you. It's a fantastic frameworks for skills for information age. And now I think HR also has to look beyond the tried and tested tools or the tools that are in their playbook and look at AI to support these kind of decisions and choices for workforce planning that they will have to make and forecast different scenarios. I partnered with the IT in an organization and we built an internal talent marketplace with SFIA framework. Like we
Nice.
used AI to parse out the skills for all employees, connected it to the SFIA framework, pulled in the current job titles to parse out skills. And we created an internal talent marketplace where you could look up skills quickly. We built skills agencies. So for each individual, we could figure out if I have this cluster of skills, which are the next cluster of skills that I can acquire easily so
Right.
that we can make those decisions that you're talking about. A BA here can move into another role because they have this set of skills. And also, it also helps organizations, I think, from an HR lens, look at people beyond the current job title that they have in the organization
I think
because
that's
it brings so
critical.
much more than just the current job title.
And HR and IT have to work in collaboration rather as separate entities. Their budgets may be separate, all of that, fine. If you need them as separate departments, I'm not saying to combine them, God no. But what I am saying is that collaboration and cooperation, they need to unite to understand the interdependencies, the integrative coordination, the cooperation. I mean, you just look at onboarding, for example, as one small piece, right? Building agile and flexible teams is the second one. You've got leaders who have no idea how to lead remote, high performance, fast moving teams. And I think there is a huge role to play for HR to unite with IT to understand what they need in terms of leadership development. And I am a big proponent of systemic leadership. And what I mean by that is that we define leadership as an organization and then we allow our teams to be trained as such. So individuals get trained in how we expect you to lead and we help you with things that, psychological safety. We're talking about a whole program that unites the entire organization's leadership as opposed to spot training where we just add the psychological safety here, or we'll say, what does agility look like here? Or we'll say, instead, it becomes immersed into the organization. If you want innovation, if you want speed, and if you want leaders to be able to lead high performance teams that are fast moving, you have to really build that culture of agility. And I think HR has a huge role to play and to understand IT better so that they can, right?
Yeah.
Unifying communities of practice then bring people together. It's easy to do. You set up a Teams group that is this community of practice. You start giving them a mandate, set goals for them. Somebody leads it, and then you have all this input, and it begins to build this unified understanding of the competencies that are required for both the technology and the human side. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I've also noticed, Patty, is that if we look at the genesis of HR as a capability in an organization, they did not grow in a very tech savvy environment. Like many HR people might not have a rich exposure or experience in the world of technology. So what should they be doing to upskill themselves so that they can have these conversations, let's say with IT leadership or finance leadership? Data savviness is not a critical or core skill right now in the world of HR. It's new to them. Like if we look at people data as a practice, that hasn't been around for a long time. People in HR are still just figuring out where to start with lighting up people data, how to go about lighting up data. And when the data is lit up, how do I go beyond just regurgitating the report to actually bringing an insight to the table? So how can we shorten that learning curve for HR to speak the language of rest of the business?
Wow. So that's much bigger than it sounds. I think our HR associations have fallen way behind. I believe HR training has fallen way behind. I believe that HR, because of the training that HR received, has been left not having a seat at the business table. So those three areas need updating, and they need updating fast. We are failing our employees by sticking with an old model of HR's only there to protect the company. We have lost our sight of how HR has the potential to help grow the company instead of just protect it from its own employees. And I really believe that our HR competencies need to be shifted in terms of, the training and the certifications that people are giving. I disagree that an HR person necessarily needs to have a degree. I don't think that's viable in a world where technology certifications are becoming so viable over and above university degrees in some areas. So I think that if we start merging and blending some of the training of HR into some of the IT training, I think we're going to make a difference. But that's huge. That is industry wide, right? It doesn't matter what organization. What can a company do? A company needs to really focus on skill sets and mindsets for HR. One of my favorite and most loved clients happens to be from HR, but leading an IT group. Another one was in IT and moved over to HR. When we start seeing that merge of understanding and the merge of their capabilities, we can really reframe the entire way HR comes to the table, and they need to be part of business decisions rather than just a delegated group. We need to co-own projects and provide cross-training inside organizations that explains. For instance, if we're putting in some kind of an ERP system or a CRM system or something organizationally that is enterprise wide, the people who are training on it need to train both technically and on the tool itself. I think they need to do it together rather than train IT with these things and train HR with these things. We need to have a cross understanding of the training where those interdependencies and shared responsibilities are really taken into consideration. I think
Yeah.
we need equal partnerships where we understand the roles, the goals, and the challenges and work as partners in any kind of transformation. And that involves a culture of respect. If the organization doesn't already have a culture of respect, I think HR and IT can get together and work at trying to pull that into this culture of respect for each other. If they can do it at a grassroots level, you're going to see the organization change and shift considerably. And like I said, leadership development, my gosh, the systemic understanding of how to build a culture that's flexible, responsible, agile. It starts with following those organizational principles and values, but it's the role of HR and IT as a partner.
Yeah. And I love your point about the leadership, the systemic leadership angle, because at the end of the day, anything new that we put into the ecosystem, if the culture
Mhm.
is not conducive, you will not get the roots to percolate through the organization. Like
Exactly,
we
exactly.
can have tours of duty on paper, but then if somebody is doing a tour of duty and the organizational culture is not accepting of that,
Yeah.
then it's going to be a hard, bumpy ride for that individual.
Well, and I think it's really critical that you understand, when we work with customers in digital transformation, we break the organization up to start with, to take a look at it, to do an analysis. And we look at the people, so that's individuals and teams. And then we look at the enterprise and we look at the business and the system. And what we're talking about is organizational awareness, commercial awareness, and purpose. The enterprise and the people, if they aren't aligned, you can't have transformation, right? So that alignment is so critical. If you are creating a systemic leadership development program, then you have to really train your people in what does self-awareness look like? How do we manage connection awareness? What is the systems intelligence that we have to understand and the governance that needs to lead that? And then how do we use our business intelligence to tie it all together and create that purpose?
So I know that you're also a certified professional coach and have background in ethical and responsible leadership. And we're talking about the topic of leadership. And AI brings up the questions of bias, data privacy, and potential cultural impact as well. So how do HR and IT jointly set those guardrails to ensure AI tools are used responsibly while still unlocking innovation?
Well, the very first part of that is that you have to understand that HR and IT have a huge role in governance, and governance is an all business activity. It's not something that you put out here for just regulatory reform, right? You're looking at governance as an all business thing that must be coordinated between the departments. And they play a huge role by defining what are the risk tolerances right from the start, coordinating around, what are we trying to achieve? Because innovation requires two specific things. One, what are we trying to achieve? Number two, what are our constraints in getting there? Right? And so if you want to innovate, you've got to coordinate your efforts in understanding both model data and transparency, segmentation for privacy and security, defining the constraints from the get-go, and laying those requirements for diversity, ethics, compliance, regulatory compliance, and then working together, and bringing in legal, bringing in finance, bringing in the other organizational pieces, but develop the policies and procedures around your AI integration, your development, your implementation, and the use. One of the key pieces is how do we use the technology within our company and what are our guidelines for our people? And a lot of people are missing that. And then implement, solid communication channels regarding AI development and the efforts across the organization. And, the two key players, I don't think IT can do that without HR, and I don't think HR can do it without IT.
Yep, yep. I love it that irrespective of where we start talking about AI, we always end up highlighting the fact that it has to be a cross functional effort. There is no one department who can solve for this complex change that we are undergoing on its own. And the time for everybody to kind of step into the other person's shoes and have some understanding of what the world looks like or what does this transformation look like from their vantage point is so critical to solve this complicated
Oh,
puzzle that we are going through.
your organization is a system. And you have to look at it that way. Yeah.
And you also mentioned, Patty, that the speed of change that we are going through is so fast. So if we have to create a projection of what the world would look like in a year or two, where do you think AI is taking organizational change and transformation?
If I had to look at how it's impacting organizational change and transformation, I think I would like people to understand that our organization doesn't just have people and technology, it has collective intelligence. And so this collective intelligence is a merge of both human and non-human intelligence that are used for decision making, for creativity, for being able to build systems that are viable for being able to reach our organizational goals. There are a lot of market impacts that are affecting that. I think when we look at the future outlook, and one of the reasons, we have to learn how to move quickly, why that OCM competency is so important is because of not just the market and IT and how fast that technology is accelerating, but the geopolitical impacts that we are seeing right now mean we have to be able to turn on a dime. One small big example, but one example external to the organization are tariffs that impact directly to a business line, and CEOs need an organization that have the ability to have agility and move quickly on the things that are going to be viable in terms of their product output. When I look at the future, I am seeing an organization that needs to see itself as a complete system, then they design and define action at that systems level. I see leaders who absolutely must drop the command and control and learn how innovation works and how they can move quickly with the right stakeholders. And that is going to be requiring a complete organizational understanding of dropping the budgetary competitiveness and the siloed ownership of things. That might mean a shift at the board level for defining purpose and performance. That might mean a shift at the executive level so that you aren't, forcing your executives through budgetary and poor performance measures into having to compete. You've almost got an executive that has to compete. You have to shift the entire conversation toward how are we unified? How do we work as a system? And how are our performance measures actually leading to that value?
Yeah, yeah. Beautifully said. And now we have some examples of organizations that give us an indication where we are going, that this transformation is not just at my workflow level. It has the potential to redefine what an organization stands for and how it's organized and what the structure of people in that organization look like. And I always use Instagram as an example. This was pre-Gen AI era when Instagram was sold off. It was just about 30 people, I think, and sold off for $1 billion and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the power of AI, what's stopping organizations to become flatter and more nimble? Maybe that's the future that we are getting into.
I'd like to see flatter, nimble, but also purposeful. So you need to look at, rather than seeing something as, I want to achieve this and so I'm going to use this tool, we need to look at intelligent infrastructure, right? So an intelligent infrastructure throughout the entire organization that is founded on a learning culture where there is radical transparency. You are really merging the human and tech interface, right? That allows the work to flow better, where you are focused on digital asset protection to protect you from your competitors, but you understand the interconnectedness and the global responsibility to all of your external interconnected systems, such as shipping and logistics, and then building an organization that's collaborative.
I love your vision of the future organization.
Thank
So,
you.
for any organization that's looking at an AI rollout, but it's still early on and hasn't quite nailed the stakeholder piece, coming back to our original conversation, especially bridging the HR and IT world, what's one practical step that they can take tomorrow to get those two teams on the same page? Or I would say those four teams that you mentioned: HR, IT, finance, and marketing. How do we get those on the same page?
I would say start small and then
Mhm.
clearly define your roles, responsibilities, and what are the unified goals. That's your very starting point. And then you engage early in OCM and transformation efforts by bringing stakeholders on immediately. You need to understand how those roles and responsibilities are played out and how, when I do X, that other department is impacted with Y, right? You really need to understand those. And then I would recommend showing and demonstrating actionable ways AI can benefit every stakeholder, right? How is AI going to benefit your team? And then what are we going to do with the existing team to fill the gap we're going to need for that future state we've defined, right? You have to set the environment up to support transformation efforts. So basic foundation, take a look at performance. If I've set a goal for the company, let's say you take a look at our strategy documentation, we say, oh, we're going to do this, but the only performance measures of our executives happen to be revenue, then you have a huge gap, right? So you have to fill the gap of what does performance mean to the strategic goals that you're defining. And then what do we do in order to set performance goals for those value actions that lead to that goal internally? So setting up a set of OKRs that are truly reflective of the transformation you're trying to achieve, not just we have to do OKRs, nobody understands how they work. Really, HR needs to play a bigger role in teaching people how that works and how that feeds the actual strategy. Focus on continual improvement. So this is where your communities of practice, where you have specific areas of expertise that can help you. And then insist on executive participation. I often say you're either ready, willing, or able. Sure, I'm ready. I've signed the charter. I'm willing. Yeah, I'll attend the updated steering committee meetings. Or I'm able. And that's where I'm leading with vision, sharing communications, explaining to people why it's critical at their level. And this is where your OCM team and your communications team can help, where you are sharing the communication of why this is critical and the role you play within it and why you add value.
Wow, I can keep going and asking you many questions for another hour, Patty, because this has been such a beautiful learning experience for me. I'm sure we will have a part two to this conversation. So, well, this has been incredibly insightful. I love hearing how you've transformed organizations, I'm sure, by putting the right leadership practices, governance, and stakeholder involvement into play. So, thank you for your time.
This has been a joy for me. I mean, this is my hyper focus, right? I love to, I could talk this ad nauseum until, everyone's eyes glassed over and we're wishing they could leave. But I so appreciate you inviting me to have a chat today.
Thank you, Fatty. And to everyone tuning in, thanks for listening to Tides. If you found this episode valuable, share it with a colleague or leave a review. We'll be back soon with more on the future of work, AI driven transformation, and how to keep your organization engaged and ready for what's next. Thanks for tuning in.